There's a reason why we invented the combustion engine.
Akira. Live on. In exploring the theme of the web of life, I have thus far discussed two principal topics. First, the web considered as selectivity, experience considered as what we pay attention to on the one hand and what we ignore on the other. And I showed how the way in which we pay attention to the world creates, isolates, that we call particular things, events, and persons, and they seem to be disconnected and to be alone because we ignore the connection between them. And I used the analogy of weaving, where the threads go underneath and join on the back in a way that is not seen on the front. So you might say in the unconscious, although I don't particularly like that word, because it makes it seem as if it was something rather dead. But on the unconscious side of life, as on the back of the weaving or the back of the embroidery, there are connections which are not published. 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 Now, in the second part of the theme was the web as mutuality. When I discussed the way the existence of a web, the existence of cloth, or anything like that, depends on a mutual support of the warp and the woof. And this miraculous thing occurs that when the things support each other, being comes into being. Cloth comes into being. And so in exactly the same way, our world is a manifestation of relativity. And this requires a balance, combination, a relationship of opposites in every domain of life. And although these opposites are explicitly different and even antagonistic, they are implicitly one. Implicitly one. They are implicitly one. And that's the secret. There are connections which are not published. A relationship of opposites in every domain of life. There are connections which are not published. There are connections which are not published. A relationship of opposites in every domain of life. There are connections which are not published. They are implicitly one. And that's the secret. See, there are these two secrets that we went into. The connection between what are supposed to be separate things and events, and the mutual unity between what are manifestly, that is to say, openly, for purposes of publication, opposites. Now, I'm going to take two other aspects of the web. There are connections which are not published. A relationship of opposites in every domain of life. There are connections which are not published. There are connections which are not published. A relationship of opposites in every domain of life. There are connections which are not published. They are implicitly one. And that's the secret. The web is a trap, like the spider's web is a trap for flies. Also, the lovely embroideries are worn by women as traps for men from a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. And I want to consider the web as something playful. You see, there are so many ways of looking at it. And you will find that all these ways are right, but what we need is the fullness of the view. From a certain point of view. Of the view. From a certain point of view. What we need is the fullness of the view. From a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. What we need is the fullness of the view. From a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. What we need is the fullness of the view. From a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. What we need is the fullness of the view. From a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. There are people, for example, who can see the web as a trap and get stuck with that. There are people to whom existence is simply hateful. They see it as nothing but a ghastly mistake. The Lord really erred when he created this world, because he arranged it in such a way that everything lives by eating something else. And what I'm doing is I'm describing a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. I'm not exactly philosophizing, I'm describing a point of view. You could look at life in such a way that the whole thing is this ghastly mistake. For example, there is no such thing as genuine kindness or love. Everybody is really pretending that they're loving other people in order to get some advantage from them. And indeed, there is a point of view which occurs in certain forms of paranoia, where people don't seem to be real. They are mechanisms. And you can think that out quite intensely with a good deal of intelligence. After all, if you start from a good old Darwinian or Freudian basis and see that man is a material machine and that the consciousness of man is simply a very involved and complicated form of chemistry, well, then this awful mechanical things, these Frankenstein that everybody is, they come around and they say, well, I'm alive, I'm a human being, I have a heart, I love, I hate, I have problems, I feel. And you feel like saying, come off it. You're just a monster. And you put on the civilized act, because really you're just a set of teeth on the end of a tube. What we need is the fullness of the view. From a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. What we need is the fullness of the view. From a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. What we need is the fullness of the view. From a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. What we need is the fullness of the view. From a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. Which you call your brain or your alleged mind. And this thing is really basically there for two purposes. One, to be cunning enough to get something to eat, to put down the tube, and the other, you know what, Mr. Freud, libido. And everything else, you see, can be construed as an elaborate, subtle way of pretending that that's not really what you want to do, but you do. But you put on a great show. Now, some people, according to this view, get mixed up. They so repress that what they really want to do is to eat the screws. They get involved in higher things that are the masks for these activities, and think that that's the real purpose of life. And then they become what's called neurotic. Because they get involved in being pure camouflage. That's what's called escaping from the facts. Not looking at life, not looking at reality correctly. Now, this is a very strange thing, you see, that it is partly true. That the universe, so far as its biological aspect is concerned, is this weird system that lives by everybody eating everybody else. Only what we do to maintain what is called order and civilization is that various species make agreement that they won't eat each other. They'll cooperate, and so be an enormous gang which can beat down the others. So the human being is the most successful so far of this gangster arrangement. We are the most predatory monsters on Earth, and we have cooperated to assault the fish and the vegetables, the chickens and the cows, and everything, you see. Only we do it by not letting our left hand know what our right hand doeth. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, unless gentlemen happen to be prone to going hunting as a sport, they don't see their food killed. They don't see the slaughterhouse. And so what you get in the butcher, in the market, is steak, is a thing in its own right. It has nothing to do with a cow. Steak is the thing shaped us and so, and it looks as if it might be like a banana or something like that, and nobody worries. And when a fish is served up, it does indeed look like a fish, but it's not the squiggly, squirmy fish that comes out on the end of the fisherman's line. When you really fish, you realize that the fish doesn't like it very much. This gangster arrangement. We are the most predatory monsters on Earth. So let me repeat. This gangster arrangement. This gangster arrangement. We are the most predatory monsters on Earth. So let me repeat. This gangster arrangement. There is that absolutely extraordinary side of things that is really terrifying. And so let me repeat the illustration I used of the cross in the net, where one side of it is scissors that cut and eat, teeth that chew and get this thing in, and the opening side of it is like James Joyce's Ulysses, the girl who says yes, and I said yes. She wants to be absolutely ravaged by her man, see? So it's open. But now comes if we take the dark view of things, the horrible view. Excuse me if I go into some rather grisly details, but have you ever heard of a vagina dentata? That is the idea that in the sexual organ of the woman there are teeth. And a lot of men have this fantasy, and so are rendered impotent. They don't make love, because they feel that the price of this blessed experience, this creative experience, loving experience, is you're going to get trapped. You're going to get emasculated. You're going to lose your precious member of this gangster arrangement. We are the most predatory monsters on Earth. So let me repeat this gangster arrangement. This gangster arrangement. We are the most predatory monsters on Earth. known history. Because this is simply the woman's come on, where she attracts, but she's out really to get you. She is basically a spider mother, you see, who is selfish and doesn't really love you. Not really, but says she does. And of course, there are on the other side all the tricks of the men, which go without mentioning. So this is a view of the world as a system of mutual exploitation and of maximal selfishness. Now, it's a very profitable view to explore. Everybody should do in their lifetime sometime two things. One is to consider death, to observe skulls and skeletons. Consider death, and to wonder what it will be like to go to sleep and never wake up. Never. That is a very gloomy thing for contemplation. But it's like manure. Just as manure fertilizes the plants and so on. So the contemplation of death and the acceptance of death is very highly generative of creative life. You get wonderful things out of that. And the other thing to contemplate is to follow the possibility of the idea that you are totally selfish. That you don't have a good thing to be said for you at all. You are a complete, utter rascal. You are a complete, utter rascal. Now, the Christians have avoided this. Because although they say in their Episcopalian form of confession that we have erred and strayed from thy ways like lost sheep, and we have followed too much the devices and desires of our own hearts, too much. We have offended against thy holy laws. We have left undone those things we ought to have done those things which we ought not to have done, and there is no health in us. But it ought to be different, and we're going to do our best to amend with the help of God's grace. That is a real con act. If you equate health with genuine love and perfect unselfishness, then in that sense there is no health in us when we look at ourselves from this point of view. Consider death. To observe skulls and skeletons. Consider death. And to wonder what it will be like to go to sleep and never wake up. Never. Consider death. To observe skulls and skeletons. Consider death. And to wonder what it will be like to go to sleep and never wake up. Never.
This ain't no middle of the ball, bitch.
You love yourself in terms of what is in terms of what is you love yourself in terms of what is in terms of what is. Now, when you go deeply into the nature of selfishness, what do you discover? You say, I love myself, I seek my own advantage. Now, what is the self that I love? What do I want? And that becomes an increasingly ever-deepening puzzle. Now, I've often referred to this when you say to somebody else, I love you. It's always rather disconcerting to the person to whom you say that. If you imply that you love them with a pure, disinterested, and holy love, they automatically suspect it as being a little bit phony. much that I can't help it. I'm absolutely bowled over by you. I'm gone. And people like that. Then they feel they're really being loved, that it's absolutely genuine. But now, I love you so much I could eat you. Now what the devil do I want? I certainly don't want to eat the girl in the sense of literally devouring her, because then she'd disappear. But I love myself. And what is me? In what way do I know me? Well, it suddenly occurs to me that I know me only in terms of you. See, when I think of anything that I know and that I like, then it's always something that can be viewed as other than me. I can never get to look at me, real me. It's always behind. It's always hidden. And I really don't know it well enough to know whether I love it or not. Maybe I don't. Maybe it's an appalling mess. But certainly the things I do love and that I want from a selfish point of view, when I really think about them, they're all something else. That's in a way outside me. You love yourself in terms of what is other. In terms of what is other. You love yourself in terms of what is other. In terms of what is other. Now we saw that there is a reciprocity. A total mutual interdependence between what we call the self and what we call the other. That's the warp and woof. And so, if you're perfectly honest about loving yourself, and you don't pull any punches, you don't pretend that you're anything other than exactly what you are, you suddenly come to discover that the self you love, if you really go into it, is the universe. You suddenly come to discover that the self you love, if you really go into it, is the universe. You don't like all of it. You're selective about it, as we saw in the beginning. Perception is selection. But on the whole, you love yourself in terms of what is other. In terms of what is other. You love yourself in terms of what is other. In terms of what is other. You love yourself in terms of what is other. In terms of what is other. You love yourself in terms of what is other. In terms of what is other. Because it's only in terms of what is other that you have a self at all. One of the very great things that C.G. Jung contributed to mankind's understanding was the concept of the shadow. That everybody has a shadow. And that the main task of the psychotherapist is to do what he called to integrate the evil. To, as it were, put the devil in us in its proper function. Because you see, it's always the devil, the unacknowledged one, the outcast, the scapegoat, the bastard, the bad guy, you see, the black sheep of the family. It's always from that point, what we could call the fly in the ointment. You see, that generation comes. In other words, in the same way as in the drama, to have the play, it's necessary to introduce a villain. It's necessary to introduce a certain element of trouble. So, in the whole scheme of life, there has to be the shadow. The shadow. The bastard, the bad guy, the black sheep of the family. The shadow. beyond being good. Good people aren't necessarily holy people. A holy person is one who's whole, who has, as it were, reconciled his opposites. And so there's always something slightly scary about holy people. And other people react to them in very strange ways. They can't make up their mind whether they're saints or devils. So holy people have, throughout history, always created a great deal of trouble, along with their creative results. Take Jesus, for example. Trouble that Jesus created is absolutely incalculable. Think of the Crusades, the Inquisition, heaven only knows what's gone on in the name of Jesus. Freud's a big troublemaker, as well as a great healer. You see, it all goes together. say you're a bunch of miserable sinners and you ought to be different, nobody laughs. But if I say, well, after all, boys will be boys, and girls will be girls, and we all know, then people laugh. Nobody can be completely honest. You will try and have a great deal of success exploring your motivation, your dark, unconscious depths. That nobody can be completely honest. You will try and have a great deal of success, but there will be a certain point at which you will say, well, I've had enough of that. Now, you see, what's happening when we do that? Now, I passed you around a lot of embroidery to look at before we started. And I'm perfectly sure that you got the point. That there's a big difference between the front and the back. In some forms of embroidery, the back is very different from the front because people take shortcuts. In the front, everything is orderly, and it is supposed to be kind of messy on the back side. See, which side will you wear? You've got to be sure you get the front in front and the back in the back. The back has all the little tricks in it, all the shortcuts, all the lowdown that people don't acknowledge. And it's exactly the same with the way we live. You know, like sweeping the dust under the carpet in a hurry just before the guests come. I mean, we do ever so many things like that. And if you don't do it, if you don't think you do it, and you think, well, really, my embroidery is the same on both sides, see? Well, you're deceiving yourself. Because what you're doing is you're taking the shortcuts in another dimension, which you're keeping out of consciousness. Everybody takes the shortcuts. Everybody plays tricks. Everybody has in himself an element of duplicity, of deception. Because you see, from this point of view that I'm discussing, where the web is the trap, to be is to deceive. Nobody can be completely honest. You will try and have a great deal of success exploring your motivation, your dark, unconscious depths. That nobody can be completely honest. You will try and have a great deal of success, but there will be a certain point at which you will say, well, I've had enough of that. Think of camouflage. The chameleon who changes its color. Think of the butterfly pretending it has eyes. Think of the flower saying to the bee, like my honey. Bee says, wow. But then that means that the bee has to be. It has to go on living and all the trouble it takes to go around collecting honey and raising other bees and organizing itself and doing that dance which tells the other bees where there's more honey. There's all that stuff to do. But the flower was deceptive. Life is a drama, and a drama is a deception, a big act. When you peel an onion and you don't really understand the nature of an onion, you might look for the pit in the center, like any ordinary fruit has. But the onion doesn't have a center. It's all skins. So when you get right down, there's nothing but a bunch of skins. You say, well, that was it. disappointing. But of course you have to understand that the skins are the part that you eat. Well, in rather the same way, you find when you explore yourself and your motivation, you go through and through and you try to find out that thing which really is genuine. That thing which really is genuine. Well, in rather the same way, you find when you explore yourself and your motivation, you go through and through and you try to find out that thing which really is genuine. That thing which really is genuine. That's why in Zen, discipline, they give you koans which require a perfectly genuine act. An act of total and absolute sincerity. And people knock themselves out trying to do this thing. But they always know that the master's going to catch them. Because he reads their thought. You know that story of von Kleist about the man who had a fight with a bear, and the bear would read his thoughts? So that the only way of hitting the bear was to do so not on purpose. Because the bear would know in advance. So it's the same in working with a Zen master. You have to do the genuine act, not on purpose. But since you're put in a situation where it's rather formal, and you're supposed to do it on purpose, you're stuck, see? So you explore the onion, and you go in and in and in, and then you find, well, it's all a deception. Well, in rather the same way, you find when you explore yourself and your motivation, you go through and through and you try to find out that thing which really is genuine. That thing which really is genuine. Well, in rather the same way, you find when you explore yourself and your motivation, you go through and through and you try to find out that thing which really is genuine. That thing which really is genuine. Now then the question arises, who's deceiving who? Who's fooling who? I'm fooling me? What is fooling? Now then the question arises, who's deceiving who? Who's fooling who? I'm fooling me? What is fooling? Fooling is playing like you're there when you're not. You know, getting somebody else to answer your name in the roll call. So, we're all, you see, this is the metaphysical basis of it. This is what the Hindus mean by Maya, the world illusion. The world is playing it's there when it isn't. And it's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't go out of it. And it's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't go out of it. And it's a thorough big trap too. But always, when you get an idea like this or a feeling like this, follow it to its extreme. Don't back out from it. If you find you're selfish, go to the extreme of what selfishness means. Confusion largely results from not following feelings or ideas to their depth. You know, people think they want to be immortal. They'd like to live forever. Do you really want to do that? Think about it. Really go into it. What it would be like. People say they want this, that, and the other. They want this kind of car. They want this kind of dress. always a good idea to think it right through. What it would involve to be in that situation, to have those desires fulfilled. It's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't get out of it. It's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't get out of it. It's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't get out of it. It's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't get out of it. Also, when you form a relationship to another person, think it through too. You see? How inconvenient could they be? However attractive. Always turn the embroidery around and look at the underside, but don't get caught doing it. See, that's something one does on the side, in secret. Because otherwise you play the game that everything is as it's supposed to be on the front. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. We've discussed the web from 3 points of view. As an analogy of the selective operation of our senses and mind, whereby certain things in the world are picked out as significant according to certain game rules. The game that we are playing mostly is the survival game. That is to say, the game ought to go on. Only the way we play the survival game has a kind of element in it which makes it difficult, because we tend to say the first rule of this game is that it's serious. And that messes the whole thing up. So you have to watch out, in other words, when you play, for contradictory game rules, self-contradictory game rules. Because if you get mixed up into them, the game ceases to be worth the candle. You start straining at doing something, then it just isn't worth it. Then the second thing that we observed was the web as an analogy of mutual interdependence. We could call it the idea that all existence is relative, that all existence is transaction. The transaction being typically exemplified by, say, the operation of buying and selling, in which there can be no buying without somebody selling, and there can be no selling without somebody else buying. That kind of interdependence of the inside going together with the outside.
What is in you going together with what is outside you is absolutely fundamental to existence. It is existence. Existence is relativity. Existence is relativity. Existence is relativity. What is in you going together with what is outside you is absolutely fundamental to existence. It is existence. Existence is relativity. Existence is relativity. Existence is relativity.
Then we explored the web as a trap. The spider's web. Won't you come into my parlor, said the spider to the fly. And we saw what should look at all of life from the point of view that it is original selfishness and original hunger. And we found that if you take that point of view to its ultimate extreme, it dissolves. And it isn't so bad after all. Shakespeare says, it is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. When it's put that way, it doesn't seem so bad after all.
What is in you going together with what is outside you is absolutely fundamental to existence. It is existence. Existence is relativity. Existence is relativity. Existence is relativity. What is in you going together with what is outside you is absolutely fundamental to existence. It is existence. Existence is relativity. Existence is relativity. Existence is relativity.
I remember that I had a Zen master friend who wrote a letter to a friend of mine which was passed on to me. This friend of mine was aspiring to be a writer, and he was trying to write novels that would put across Buddhism to people. Sugar the pill. And my Zen master friend didn't approve of this at all. He said, don't write any story to people. Write it to the great sky. Because all the real masters of literature, especially novelists and storytellers, are great masters of nonsense. Think of Lewis Carroll. You can use Lewis Carroll, and he did use Alice in Wonderland as a Zen textbook. It was brilliant and the slithy toads that gyre and gimble in the waves. That's Zen. I had a discussion with a great master in Japan. We were talking about the various people who are working to translate the Zen books into English. He said that's a waste of time. If you really understand Zen, he said, you can use any book. You could use the Bible. You could use Alice in Wonderland. You could use the dictionary. Because, he said, the sound of the rain needs no translation. 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 Evening rain. It is the banana leaf that speaks of it first. You see, that's the point. And all the talk in the world doesn't get it unless you listen to the talk in a new way. The sound of the rain needs no translation. 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 you see, there's something going on. This web may be looked at as pattern, and the world is basically patterning. What else do you do when you come to think of it? What else do you do when you come to think of it? When you eat, you are turning food into the pattern of your skeleton, your muscles, and your nervous system. That's a pattern. And you say you see basically hooray for that pattern. That's a pattern. And you say you see basically hooray for that pattern. But then you want other patterns. You like to look through a microscope and see the patterns that exist in the small world. And see the patterns. You like to look through a kaleidoscope or a kaleidoscope and see the patterns. You like to have paintings around and see the patterns. You like to watch the water play and see the patterns. You want to watch the birds go, the clouds, and all that. Fascinating patterns. And that really doesn't it seem to be the point? I mean, what do you do when you're very rich? Take some rascal of ancient times who became very rich by all sorts of skullduggery and warfare and so on. He got himself a suit of armor, a beautiful sword. And he had the armorer make the most intricate patterns, arabesques of inlaid gold on the steel. Why? Because it's, as they say among the Pennsylvania Dutch, it's for nice. It's a great thing to have all that jazz. And that's what we go for. That's a pattern. And you say you see basically hooray for that pattern. That's a pattern. And you say you see basically hooray for that pattern. But then you want other patterns. You like to look through a microscope and see the patterns that exist in the small world. And see the patterns. You like to look through a kaleidoscope or a kaleidoscope and see the patterns. You like to have paintings around and see the patterns. You like to watch the water play and see the patterns. You want to watch the birds go, the clouds, and all that. Fascinating patterns. What do people do? Most of the time. What would they like to do, really? What's your idea of heaven? What's your idea of heaven? What do people do? Most of the time. What would they like to do, really? What's your idea of heaven? What's your idea of heaven? When people are unoccupied, as far as I can make out, they get together and they sing and dance. Or else watch somebody else do it. Nowadays we live in a non-participative culture and we don't do very much singing and dancing. We're lugubrious. But we watch other people do it on television. What we really are interested in is to be able to spend all the time going and that's what our heart's doing, that's what our lungs are doing, it's what our eyeballs are doing, and it's what all these fantastic capillaries of the veins are doing. They're going just judy-boo-doo, hubba-bubba, you see? And that's the point. in which the universe is presided over by somebody serious. It's only very, very occasional obscure reference